Okay, good morning. Can everybody hear me fine? Okay, great. All right, so thanks for joining me here today. We're going to talk about utilizing Jamf Pro in a HIPAA-compliant environment. So my name's Derrick. I'm a systems engineer with Jamf. I have 12 years experience deploying anything Apple. Prior to working at Jamf, I worked at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. I was the Jamf administrator there. I also worked with our health and wellness center, as well as the counseling and psychological services. And prior to Lehigh, I worked for a small healthcare system in southeastern Pennsylvania. So first, I just wanted to talk and touch base briefly on HIPAA. I'm not going to bore you guys on HIPAA. You could go to Google and Google what HIPAA is and read a bunch of big documents about it. But I just wanted to go over just a few key pieces of information. The federal law was enacted in 1996. It provides patient rights, and it protects the privacy and security of the patient's data. HIPAA requires healthcare providers, organizations, and any business associate to develop and follow procedures that ensure the information in the healthcare record is confidential, and that your security of your PHI, protected health information, is transferred, received, handled, and shared appropriately. This applies to speaking, paper, or any kind of electronic communications. One thing to keep in mind is when a device goes missing, tools like Jamf Pro and other MDMs allow that risk for HIPAA breach to go down considerably if you have the right tools in place to be able to remote wipe that device and mitigate that risk. So just an example of a minor HIPAA breach would be if a nurse walks away from a workstation and she forgets to lock her PC. That would be a HIPAA violation. That's something that I'm sure we all seen anytime that we walked into a doctor's office. Cool. So just a little question here. True or false, having a passcode on your iOS device is all you need to keep your data secure? So obviously we all know that answer is false. It's great to have a passcode on your device, but there's several security considerations you should take into place, making sure that any kind of information that you have on that device isn't going to be leaked out somehow. In some of my former roles, I've definitely seen information not properly handled, especially when it came to employees using their personal devices to communicate, take pictures when they're out in the field. And it's something that, you know, if I was there and somebody was taking a picture of my wound, I probably wouldn't want them taking that on their personal device and hooking it up to their computer and backing it up and storing it in the cloud. So it's definitely something to take into play. One thing that I encountered was a doctor left the health system, and prior to her leaving the health system, she did a local backup of her iPhone, which at that point was not managed. And a couple weeks later, she restored that backup to her new phone. Yeah. Gratefully, that doctor actually reached out to us and let us know about what happened, and we were able to kind of take care of that. But it opened up this whole other conversation that we had with our security team at that point about who should be able to back up these kinds of things on their devices. And it was something that really wasn't thought of a couple years ago. You know, we went from back in 2007, 2008, people had Blackberries and the iPhone came out, and it really wasn't a big deal at that point about data leaking. People really weren't using these devices. However, now in 2019, everybody in a hospital, everybody in a doctor's office has an iOS device. They can't function without them. Another big breach that I've seen was doctors having their notification center just open up and their calendar alerts saying Jane Smith has an ultrasound. And you would walk up to the phone and take a look, and you may not even know who Jane Smith is, but you knew she was getting an ultrasound in 5 minutes. So something that's often overlooked, but really any MDM provider would be able to help you out with that, with hiding the access to the notification center. Another odd issue that I encountered was I was in a small doctor's office that was not attached to a corporate network, and somebody wanted to get on the Wi-Fi network there. So they used proximity sharing to connect to the small network in that office. And they were able to get online, and they were able to access systems that they shouldn't have been able to access. This really isn't something that happens too much when you're on a corporate network, but a small little mom and pop doctor's office that you might be doing consulting for, if they're using Jamf Pro, it's definitely something to take into consideration. You can push out a config profile with a restriction to disable the proximity-based password sharing requests. So one thing I want to touch on is IBECON technology. So this is something that when it first came out, it was really cool. You could walk into a room, your device would talk to the little iBeacon with Bluetooth low energy, and it would reach out to Jamf Pro or another MDM, and it would say, hey, I'm in this region, what should I do? With Jamf Pro, you could scope to certain iBeacon ranges, and what a lot of people started doing was they'd say, all right, if I'm gonna be in the operating room, we're not gonna have camera access. So when that device would check in there to the operating room, a config profile would get pushed out while it was in scope, boom, the camera would get disabled. Over time, there's been numerous cases where the iBeacon technology hasn't been as reliable and robust as what was described there, and doctor walked into the operating room, camera was enabled. So there's other alternatives out there to iBeacon technology that everybody could kind of be aware of. Is anybody using network segments in their MDM to scope config profiles out to? Okay, cool. No problem. So in Jamf Pro, you're actually able to set up a network segment. Within that network segment, you could narrow it down to a certain subnet and say any devices on this subnet, I'm going to push out a config profile. I'm going to scope it to this network segment. And when they're on this network segment, X, Y, and Z will happen. No camera, no Airplay. This is great for doctors who might be issued a corporate or institutionally owned device. However, maybe they want to use it for personal use, and corporate or the hospital allows that personal use of that device. It's something that's out there, and the doctors kind of need to be aware of it. You can't just go snapping pictures in the OR. Not something that any of us would want when we're laying down on a table there getting worked on. So it's something that when I talk to a lot of people, they're not aware of the network segments in Jamf Pro, and it's a great tool that you're able to just kind of replace this older iBeacon technology with. That way when their device connects, they're able to get those policies pushed down to them. I'm sorry? Yeah, true. So obviously there's a big push in healthcare, not just now, but in the last several years. It's something that Jamf kind of has been ahead of its time with. We've worked with a number of affiliates to have partnerships to be able to integrate EMR, bedside charts, other lighting control systems and applications that are available out on the App Store. We're able to integrate them into the entire patient experience. So if you're sitting there in a hospital room, you're able to grab an iPad or whatever iOS device is issued to you. You're able to control the lights, the room temperature, everything like that. So it's something that we always strive to offer 0-day support for. Whenever the new latest and greatest iOS comes out, we're right there on board supporting those new features. So when iOS 13 comes out, the new features that are available in the beta, Jamf will be supporting with day one support. So it all kind of flows back to this iOS ecosystem. So whether you're a large hospital or you're a smaller care community, you could really embrace the power of iOS devices to make sure that the entire patient experience is going to be what you want. Now, one thing that comes up often, and it's something that is often overlooked, is sending text messages on personally owned devices to a doctor on his corporate owned device. So that's something that we don't want to see happening, obviously. So there are platforms out there to allow secure encrypted text messaging that's not stored on a device, that's stored up in the cloud. TigerText, which is now Tiger Connect. Thank you. TigerText is something that I used previously in one of my former roles. It's a secure texting solution, nothing stored on the phone. If the phone goes missing, nobody's able to access any of those pictures or anything else that's kind of being shared on there. It's also used a lot of times to get a hold of doctors, nurses, other people in a real critical manner. Kind of replaces those old pagers that you see people walking around with. You're able to send messages, high priority, things like that. So communicating is definitely something that's kind of gone from the old picking up the phone to just being right there in the palm of your hands with the iOS device. So we're gonna touch a little bit on Jamf's role with the whole patient experience and care. So what a lot of hospitals are using and medical centers, they're starting to actually collect specimens and administrate medications right through the iOS device, whereas before maybe they had to walk up to a workstation on wheels, the computer cart, to administer those meds. Now they could just go on a device, pop in what they're giving them, sign off on it digitally, boom, they're good to go. It's in their medical record. Sorry about that. Cool. So one thing I want to touch base on a little bit is the Cisco Security connector. So it's a great iOS app that can be managed. It allows for additional security features to be deployed. This is great because an employee could easily mistype a URL that they're trying to go to, and they'll click maybe on a phishing link in an email, and it might lead them to a malicious site. So the Cisco Security connector, it prevents connections on both a DNS and IP address level, even on public Wi-Fi or over a cellular connection. It's cloud managed, and Jamf Pro does support the app as well as some of the other MDMs that are out there. So something that I've run into with some professionals is they do not want to run iOS updates on their devices. Who here has a user who just running a really old version of iOS? Yeah, we've got a couple people. So with Jamf Pro, we are able to defer to software updates 90 days from that release. It does require that the device is supervised. Most of the customers that I've talked to, their devices are supervised in these type of environments. However, there are some people that they might be doing a user-initiated enrollment, and they might not be able to get this specific feature. But it's definitely something that with remote commands in Jamf Pro, you might be able to create a smart group saying, needs a software update to the latest iOS. And then you can push out a remote command to that smart group, tell them to go ahead and upgrade. If they choose not to upgrade, they can defer it up to 90 days. And then at that point, it'll just automatically install. So that's a nice feature that's made its way. A lot of requests in the community for that. And it's something that, happily we don't have people running really old iOS versions anymore on these devices that are supervised and managed through DEP, Apple School Manager, Apple Business Manager. So I wanted to touch a little bit on BYOD in healthcare. So this is something that it's really popular with doctors. Nobody wants to carry around 2 phones. So some organizations are allowing doctors and other staff at that level to participate in a BYOD program where if they want their calendar or they want their email on their device, they'll have to enroll it in the Jamf Pro server. So the first thing that they're presented with when they go to the enrollment URL is they're going to be asked whether it's a personally owned or institutionally owned device. So this is really important. It's all about transparency. We want people to be able to see what's getting put on their device. So when you enroll a BYOD device in Jamf, first thing it's going to ask you is whether you own it or if the institution owns it. Obviously, if it's BYOD, you're owning it. And it's going to let you know exactly what Jamf is allowed to do. BYOD in Jamf Pro varies compared to user-initiated enrollment because we're able to do a little bit more with user-initiated enrollment and with the automated device enrollment than you are with BYOD. So BYOD is able to push down apps, you're able to lock the device, and we could remove any institutionally managed apps that are on that device. However, if we see that you have Tinder or Snapchat on your phone, not going to be able to remove it. That's an app that you put on your phone. It's your personal phone. Not even going to be able to see that. So only managed applications in the BYOD program are going to be able to be seen through Jamf Pro. And that's one thing that pops up often. When I was a Jamf admin, I always had users coming up and saying, what are you going to be able to see on my device? I don't want you to be able to see my pictures and this and that. And it's great when you could open up the profile and be transparent with them and show them exactly what Jamf Pro or any other MDM is pushing down. And that's something that Apple is great at. And it can be a little bit of a headache. But if you're transparent and open with your users, and if you have documentation to show them how Jamf Pro is helping them, you'll be fine. So with your corporate-owned devices, the workflow is a little bit different. You're going to go through the automated MDM enrollment, sped this up a little bit. You're going to get on your you're going to get on your device. It's going to install all the applications that you want, and it might put a config profile on there for the Wi-Fi or the VPN. Set a desktop background. And then it's going to go ahead and install your EMR or any other applications that you're going to be pushing out. So this is great if this is a one-to-one, I'm a doctor, I'm issued this phone, this is just for me and I'm going to be using it. But what about the employees that might be sharing a device, like a nurse or somebody in hospice, where they might get this device for part of their shift and they might be passing it on to somebody else? That's something that I really wish there was a solution 5 years ago when I was managing Apple devices at that small hospital that I was at. It was really hard to have shared devices at that point because there wasn't a solution. Has anybody heard of Jamf Setup and Reset? Okay, so it's something that we released last October. It's a free application, anybody can use it. Requires a little bit of configuration to get it with what you would like to have on it, but it's something that doesn't just apply to healthcare. You could use Jamf Setup and Reset in education and retail. It allows you to have a true shared device, and you're able at the end to sanitize that device so no information is passed on to the next user who's going to be using it. And that's back to empowering people with technology that puts us humans first. And that's really where Jamf Setup and Reset, it takes the IT out of it, and allows you to really have that user controller experience. So a good example and use case for this, prior to working at Jamf, I was at Lehigh University, and they had paper intake forms that were being used for students to fill out their healthcare needs when they were going to the health and wellness and counseling and psychological services department. And they would fill out that paper intake form. They would bring the clipboard back over to the receptionist, and then she would wind up inputting that information into their chart. So it was kind of old school, a lot of work after the fact. So what we did was we developed a secure portal that they would go to, and they would fill out that questionnaire. That questionnaire would then input that data into an application called Titanium Schedule, which was the EMR. A lot of higher ed uses Titanium Schedule for this instance. Then what would happen was they would fill that out, they would hand the iPad back at the front desk, and then they would take the iPad, they would wipe it, and then they would have to set it up, Jamf would do its thing, and then they were good to go for the next person. It was a nice process. It was better than the paper intake forms, but it wasn't where I wanted it to be. So when they released Jamf Setup and Reset, immediately I had to try this out. I had to see how can this help in my environment. So what I did was I set up Jamf Setup and Reset, and when the application launched, it asked them which survey they wanted to take, whether it was an intake form or if it was another survey where it would ask them some other questions, and that data would get aggregated. And then at the end, they would have the option to hit reset. It would sterilize the device, and they could just hand it back, and it could be ready for the next person. So there's many use cases for it, that being just one of them. I've seen people in retail use Jamf Setup and Reset, healthcare, even small mom and pop businesses that might just be using a Square credit card reader, but they might want the person on the next shift to have some other apps. Great use case. So I'm going to do a little demo of Jamf Setup and Reset for those of you who aren't familiar to kind of show you what the UI looks like. So this is the device after it turns on. You have the Jamf Setup app, and once you open up the Jamf Setup app, it's going to ask you what your role is. So in this case, we're talking about healthcare, so we have it set up for a healthcare role. So what it'll do is any applications that you want installed on that device, they're going to be installed. However, they're going to be hidden from the other role. So if I'm a nurse for my shift right now, I'm going to select nursing, hit submit. It's going to configure the device. I might get a different background if I'm a nurse than one of the other users, and it's going to put my applications on there. Great, it's the end of my shift. I'm going to hand this device off to somebody else who might be working in transport. They're going to go on to setup. They're going to hit transport, hit submit. It's going to configure the device for transport. Got a different background and the app that I'm supposed to have for transport. So it's nice in that case. One thing that I didn't do was reset the device, so nothing got taken off of it, which I'm holding off on that for now. At the end of the shift, when the device gets put back on the cart to be charged up, you're going to hit reset, and it's going to sterilize the device. And it's quick. You're not waiting 20 minutes, it's a minute or two, the device is wiped, and nothing is able to be brought back for the next user. So.
The way you can trigger that with actions, like when you plug it into the cart,
So yes, there are options out there with Apple Configurator. Apple Configurator has its own set of automated commands that you could use. Also, Apple has an offering out there, and this is something that you could talk to your Apple SE. But there's a device, and it's a professional service from Apple. But what they'll do is it's essentially a Mac Mini that's talking to that cart. And when you plug the device in, it'll just automatically do it without you having to open up Reset. But that's a professional service from Apple. Definitely talk to your Apple SE a little bit more about that. You're welcome. So again, many use cases for Jamf setup and reset. I'm sure you'll probably find something in your organization, or even if you do consulting down the road, this might be something that you might be interested in. And again, just another little demo here of setup. Reset. Cool. So now we're going to go and talk a little bit about some of our other offerings that are out there. Kind of to touch a little bit on what you were saying there about automating some of this. We do have a new offering that's been made available called the Jamf Healthcare Listener. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So the Jamf Healthcare Listener, it's used in many settings around here. Geisinger is somebody locally who's using something like this. But what it does is it allows you to give an iPad and an Apple TV to a patient. And when that patient is admitted, in the EMR, it's going to send an HL7 command into Jamf Pro, and it's going to say this patient was admitted, here's their iPad and their Apple TV. They can only talk to each other. We don't want them to be able to Airplay to the room next door. Obviously, if somebody pulls up their chart, we don't want them to see it on the room next door or anything like that. So this kind of automates the process where when the patient checks out, they're going to go ahead, it's going to send an HL7 command back to Jamf Pro saying initiate a device wipe. It's going to sterilize the Apple TV and the iPad. Good to go for the next patient. So another thing that's often overlooked is Apple TV management. So it's something that's being more relevant in the healthcare industry. A lot of people are getting rid of just having the standard channels, and they're replacing the TV with an Apple TV. And they're allowing, again, to make the patient experience a little bit better. You're going to have access to your medical chart. You're going to be able to control your lights. They might push down the Netflix and Hulu apps to make you a little bit more comfortable in being able to binge watch your shows that you want to watch versus whatever boring things are on PBS. So with the Apple TV, it's something that can be completely automated. IT doesn't have to touch the device every time somebody checks out. Everything's done over the air as long as you have a hardwired connection. We don't want it to be on Wi-Fi. We're able to send remote commands and put it in a single app mode if that's what we want to use. Maybe we just want to show the patient's nurse for the day and what's for dinner, and that's it. We don't want them doing anything else with the TV. It's something that you're able to do, but a lot of organizations out there, they're really using the Apple TV to make the patient more comfortable and to allow them access to things that they might have at home that normally you're not going to find in a hospital or other health environment. So one thing that when you're deploying devices in the masses, again, I'm going to touch on Airplay. It's something that's really cool to be able to, have something on your Mac or have something on your phone and throw it on your TV. But in the hospital, if you're looking at an X-ray or something like that, you don't want it to show up on somebody else's TV. It's just not good, and you don't want somebody to know that you have a tumor or anything like that. So that's one thing where Apple TV the device pairing is something that you really want to take into play. And it's something that can be set up in Jamf Pro for you to be able to have those devices talking to each other to know this iPad is going to be in room A19 talking to the Apple TV in room A19 and nobody else. So being able to define those devices and what they can AirPlay to is huge, because it eliminates all that contact out of the entire request, if that makes sense. So. And this is where I'm going to kind of touch on using the Apple TV again. So this is kind of just a demo of a company that's out there, Concierge Connect. You're able to order your meal. You're able to order housekeeping. You're able to take a survey and let somebody know that you need help. And this is somebody that in the past, this application, they might not have thought that it would have been for healthcare. It might have been just for a conference room display, but they realized that there was a need out there. So this is a great example of a partner taking a look into the future and saying, you know what, we really care about that experience that people are having. Let's see what we could do for healthcare. As you can see up on the screen, you're able to take everything from that big binder that's usually in your hospital room, and you're able to explore everything right on the Apple TV. It's really just a great experience for everybody. So I'm going to invite James Raffel. Sorry, I'm so bad with names. I'm going to invite him up here. I just want him to give us a little update on Geisinger and their patient bedside program that they're having, and they're about 1 year into it. Different phases, but I want James to come up here and kind of give us a little update about Geisinger, what's going on at Geisinger, and how they're moving forward with their project. So.
Good morning. So last year I presented here about the project that we're working on. In that presentation, I didn't want to be a show for Jane. For this one, I guess I can a little bit because that's the tool we use. And a lot of what Adam has talked about is what we've done over the years. Oh, I guess I need to talk into something here. There you go. Is that better? Okay. So it was actually about 4 years ago we started. And to your question about Mac Minis and automatically resetting things, that's how we started before we started to take full advantage of what we could with Jamf, and before they made things like Healthcare Listener and Reset. So back then, the easiest way to reset devices was to plug them into a Mac Mini, use tools from a site called Config Automation, and reset them that way. Now what we've done probably in the past 4 months is we're transitioning everything that we do to either reset or using Healthcare Listener, which I don't know how familiar everybody is with HL7 interface language. You don't really want to be that familiar with it, but again, using Jamf, it makes it really easy to essentially what an ADT feed is: admission, discharge, and transfer. So anytime a patient is discharged or transferred, the command goes directly to the iPad, remotely wipes it, and then depending on, in your demo, it took you right back to the screen. In real life, that's not exactly what happens. Depending on the steps that you want to have the patient take. So when you get your shiny new iPhone or iPad, it makes you feel kind of good to go through some of those steps so you know it's a fresh iPad. So what we actually do is we stop it at, we turn everything off except enable location services. And language. So they can choose a language, they enable location services, and then it takes them to their home screen, and they're given a variety of apps, a variety of web links, depending on the floor that they're on. You could be on a HEMONC floor, so there could be education for those types of patients. You could be on an ortho floor, and it can be customized that way. So we actually use, instead of the network segmentation, we use extension attributes in the system where we're defining the set of iPads. Most all of our iPads live in the patient rooms, so they never leave, which makes it similar to a one-to-one type of setup in the education world. But then we also have shared situations in the outpatient world where an iPad might be given to a pregnant mom-to-be, where she has to take a test for an hour and sit there. So they give her an iPad to pass the time. That's where we use reset. And from there, they give the iPad back, hit reset, and it goes back to its original settings. And at this point, we're rolled out to about 300-ish rooms. We have another 1,300 that we're going to be doing in the coming year. So we're going to be busy, but happy to talk. I don't want to take up more of your time, but happy to talk if anybody afterwards has any questions about what we've done. It's been, and again, being a JAMP presentation, it has made this process so much easier than when we started 4 years ago. And it looks like more stuff, more flexibility is being made available in the JAMP product that's going to help us for the future. So, I mean, I can take questions now or afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to hear a real use case from guys in here on JAMP Setup and Reset and the Healthcare Listener. They have an awesome program. So it's really, really good to hear a use case from somebody local here in this area. But yeah, if anybody has any questions for James, I'll throw it a catch box. Let's take those questions now.
Or if not, that's fine too.
Cool. Thank you, James.
Yipper.
Cool. So that's a next segue into something that previously was kind of a painful experience for me and kind of a waste of time, was giving these devices to users. And when they'd be finished with them, the nurse would physically have to take that device, bring it back to the IT department, and we'd have to wipe it with Configurator, apply a blueprint to it, put the apps on it. It was just a nightmare. So there's, again, many use cases for setup and reset. And I'm sure, you're going to leave here and maybe want to play around with it on your own. Again, they're free apps. If you're a Jamf customer, go for it. It's something that's really, really going to help you guys. So let me see what I had on deck next for us. Let me bring up another demo. And if you guys want to demo setup and reset with this little guy here, all you got to do is go to jamf.io. When you're on jamf.io, it'll present you with the different options that are out there. As far as, if you want to use it in education, if you want to use it in healthcare, you could view the patient or the staff experience. It's something that we made available for you guys to kind of play around with. So that's the next thing I'm going to kind of go through is the patient experience. So here we went through our automated device enrollment. Again, we're going to give them that native Apple experience. We're going to let them know that this device is in a like new state. They're going to choose their preferred language, their region. They're going to connect to the Wi-Fi network. It's going to let them know that the device is being managed by Jamf. It's going to go ahead and install any necessary configurations. And it's going to start installing the applications in the background. Now, this is something where you could really make that patient experience great utilizing VPP. You might want to, instead of giving them access to the App Store you might want to just use self-service to push out applications that most people are going to use. Facebook, Candy Crush, Netflix, Hulu, things like that can all be made available in self-service. Again, it kind of just makes them not have to use their personal Apple ID. If it's somebody who never really used an Apple device before, it alleviates that headache of having to create an Apple ID, and they could just go in and play the game that they want or be able to read what they need to. So really, the iOS self-service platform is something that's growing. Recently, we introduced the ability to brand the iOS self-service, and it's something that might be looking different in the future. But definitely take advantage of VPP. There's no limit to the free apps. Again, it's kind of all about making that experience out there for them. Back in the day when I had to use Apple Configurator, I was using VPP, but then I was using Apple Configurator to push out blueprints. At that time, the organization I was at was not utilizing Jamf. At first, they were actually just handing devices out to people when I got there. They didn't want to invest it in MDM. So I started using Configurator and Profile Manager to pseudo manage the devices. And it worked, but it was something that was not in my job description, and it was something that kind of wound up just being my full-time job of just wiping these devices and redeploying them and making sure I was getting them back from nurses, and it was just something that really drastically needed to be improved. So this is, again, when they announced Setup and Reset back in October, I was just like, oh man, I wish this was available a couple years ago. It would have just saved me a lot of time. Any questions on Jamf Setup and Reset? Cool. Anybody think they might be using this? Cool. Awesome. If you guys have any questions on Jamf Setup and Reset, feel free to stop by the Jamf table down across from the registration desk. Also, reach out to your customer success manager in Jamf Nation. You could find out who they are. Reach out to them if you want a demo or talk to somebody at Jamf about it. We'll definitely make the time for you. Cool. So, any questions?
Actually,
Yeah.
not really related to the health industry.
App-
but I wanted to take this. Oh, yeah, I'll bring it up.
Yeah.
Yes, eat the microphone, eat the microphone. I don't really work with a hospital much. I work for a college of public health, so we do have a lot of research going on. Like I said, our school just got Jamf a month ago, so we haven't done a whole lot of testing yet. I was just wondering if HIPAA networks in particular made it difficult to access Jamf.
Absolutely. It's something that when you're having that initial conversation with your SE and your salesperson, it's something that definitely comes into play. As far as it being difficult, I wouldn't necessarily say that Jamf makes it difficult. It's really that
My security guy makes it difficult.
yeah. But I'd say testing is key, especially if you're in a large organization that might have multiple sites and things like that, or they might have a separate network just for certain traffic. Definitely with you being a new customer, I would definitely look into getting like a test dev instance set up to be able to test those out, not in your production environment.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
So what we actually did was set up a completely separate VLAN. So when HIPAA obviously comes into play, patient devices or employee devices, if you're doing that type of work, keeping them segregated off the general population network makes it a lot easier to comply with some of the HIPAA laws or guidelines, just because then you're not dealing with potentially putting patient identifiable data on there. And you had mentioned one example before about taking pictures. We actually do allow patients to take pictures through the little Epic app that we put on, and with the understanding that you don't add a name or diagnosis or some other things. In my presentation, I didn't get into the HIPAA details either because it's not fun reading at all. But if you are starting fresh, definitely, find a HIPAA for Dummies type of book, because it will make your life a lot easier if you have some knowledge.
Absolutely. Thanks, James. Cool. Any other questions? Yes. Okay. Pass it down.
So two questions. First, most of the conversation today has been around iOS devices
Yes.
in the HIPAA environment. What if you're managing Mac OS devices that might need access to HIPAA data, like the doctor's office computer? Is there anything special that Jamf can do to help us manage that more securely?
Absolutely. I mean, you do have the config profile, restrictions that you could put in place there. My experience personally has been a lot in the iOS environment, and that might be something that maybe James might have a better input on, just because my particular instance was all iOS devices. We had maybe 5 Macs that were out there, and most of them were in the marketing department. But yeah, again, maybe that's something that James might have some insight on too.
Well, so my project is specific to the iOS. We do utilize Jamf to manage formats. Those 2 athletes are not for this session. Or something else. But yeah, afterwards, if you want,
So thank you for that. And then the second question, again, all of this discussion has been around what Jamf can do to make your device more secure, and certainly a managed device is more secure than an unmanaged device. Is there anything we need to worry about on the other side? Are there any special, again, I'm thinking on the Mac OS side, you now have Jamf Remote, lets you remote into machines. Well, that's a security hole or now a vector of information extraction that didn't exist before Jamf was there. Are there any special considerations around HIPAA on how you have to configure Jamf to make sure that Jamf itself doesn't become a loophole?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, just by using Jamf, you're not obviously going to be HIPAA compliant. It's really how you're using it in your environment, and that's something that we can't stress enough. But again, yeah, I mean, I probably should have put that in the presentation notes that it was kind of tailored towards iOS, because that's really where my experience was with this particular topic. But I could definitely put you in touch with somebody at Jamf to answer those questions for you if you'd like.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I work for the College of Health and Human Development here at Penn State. And we have tons of what's called ATOs, authority to operate, I think is what they're called. So we have HIPAA, Mac, like iMacs, Mac Minis. So we create smart groups inside of Jamf that are baselined, tailored, that look at the name of the computer. So we name the computers based off of the ATO, so it'd be ATO 138 is what we name the machine. So as soon as that thing's named and instantly put in Jamf, it automatically gets put in that smart group. Based off that smart group, it gets the configuration profile, the software and everything. It needs to be locked down for that HIPAA, ATO, whatever it is. If that helps you any, with the idea of how to do it. And as long as anything's named that name, it gets dumped right into that HIPAA group and it becomes compliant based off of, because we have to send it away. We have to actually send all the configuration profiles away to our security department. They have to approve it, and then we have to go back and then set it all up for that. So.
You also use Jamf to make it so the name can't be changed?
Yes. And as far as iPads go, we actually lock our iPads down to a set SSID. So if somebody steals the iPad, they can't do anything with it anyways. They have to come back on campus and get on that one wireless that's in that one room. So that keeps them that way as well.
Absolutely, yeah, that's really good feedback, and that's why we're all here having these discussions and sharing everything with each other. Definitely when these devices go missing, there's a lot of neat things that you could do with smart groups, getting the devices put into that smart group if it meets a certain criteria, if it's on a certain subnet, et cetera. Great, thank you. Anybody else? Cool. Well, we're going to end a little bit early, but you guys could relax here or head out. Cool. Thank you.